A glittering promise vanished, leaving only silence and suspicion behind. Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. I am your host, Victor Lane. Let me know where you're listening from. I always enjoy seeing the reach. Thanks for making this mystery circle complete. Now, the case begins. If you've ever seen Nero Wolfe wince, and I mean really wince, not the eye flutter he reserves for cucumber sandwiches sliced improperly, then you've likely seen a woman enter the brownstone unannounced, with the kind of perfume that assaults before it introduces. That's how our Tuesday afternoon started. Me halfway through my second cup of coffee, Wolfe ankle-deep in orchid mulch, and the front door swinging open like we were running a dime store detective agency on 14th Street. She introduced herself as Miss Daphne Albury, and she had the look of a woman who spent her mornings in courtrooms and her evenings pretending she didn't. Platinum blonde, maybe 40, maybe not, dressed in dove grey with gloves to match. The sort of dame who always had something in her handbag and didn't want you to know what it was. "I didn't phone ahead," she said, glancing around the hallway like it might sprout a stenographer. "I assumed urgency would permit leniency." "Miss Albury," I replied, sidestepping her perfume cloud and nudging the door shut, "Mr. Wolfe permits nothing but appointments and beef consommé before noon. You're lucky it's past lunch." That earned me a stare. She had courtroom eyes, quick, practiced, looking for angles. "I have something delicate," she said, "and dangerous, but neither are illegal." I gave her my most non-committal smile, the one Wolfe says makes me look like a butcher's cat. Those are our two least favorite flavors. "Is Mr. Wolfe receiving?" she asked, and there it was, that little flick of entitlement. I didn't love her already. "He's cultivating orchids," I said. "Which means he's off limits until dinner unless you're dying dead or coming in with foie gras." That earned a smile. "What if I told you I have a promissory note signed in diamonds and someone wants to steal it before I do?" That sentence didn't make sense. It also didn't have to. I gave her a moment, then said, "Sit tight, I'll go poke the bear." Upstairs in the plant rooms, it was 100 degrees and smelled like botanical warfare. Wolfe stood at the bench with his hands buried in the root tray like he was massaging secrets out of the soil. He didn't look up. "She's wearing gloves," I said, "which means she's either polite or hiding something. I'd bet the latter." She dropped a line about a diamond promissory note and someone stealing it before she can. "She's presumptuous," he grunted, "and scented like—" "A speakeasy," I added, "but interesting, in a court-adjacent, high-drama sort of way." He sighed. "You've used 3 metaphors and none of them useful. Bring her in." I did. She came in with the poise of someone used to being watched, maybe even cross-examined. Wolfe gestured toward the red chair across from his desk, but didn't bother standing. She took the seat like she'd just stepped into a deposition. "I am Nero Wolfe," he said without pleasantries. "You are Miss Daphne Albury. I was an estate attorney until last week. Now I suppose I'm a liability." Wolfe tilted his head just slightly. That was interest in Wolfe-speak. "Go on," he said. "There's a document," she said. "A private promissory note drafted 10 years ago between a dying industrialist and a woman who was not his wife. The amount promised is substantial. Not in cash, in diamonds. Physical stones stored in a Swiss vault. The note was to be redeemed only upon the death of the man's legal widow. That happened last Thursday." "And this concerns you how?" Wolfe asked. "I drafted the document. I was a junior associate then. It was done in confidence, off the firm's books. Notarized but never filed. I still have the original. Not wise, Wolfe murmured. I didn't intend to keep it. But the woman who was to receive it, Elisa Lang, disappeared 5 years ago. And now someone else is trying to locate the note. Who? She met Wolfe's eyes. His son. Wolfe closed his eyes like he was filing that somewhere in his cranial index. Name? Charles D. Holt, Jr. That got Wolfe's eyebrows to twitch, which is like most people gasping. The Holt fortune is still very much alive, he said. It is, she agreed, but not quietly. The family is at war over inheritance, the businesses, even the properties. If Charles gets the note, he could claim it was forged. If the note reaches Lang, if she's still alive, it could blow up the estate. So you've come here to, what, hide it? Burn it? Frame it? I asked. To have Mr. Wolfe hold it in confidence, she said, and investigate who's looking for it, because someone broke into my apartment yesterday and I didn't tell anyone I still had it. Wolfe pressed his fingers together. You understand, Miss Albury, that I am not a safe deposit box. You're a fortress with a vocabulary, and you're incorruptible. That's why I came. I smirked, but Wolfe didn't. He reached for the bell and summoned Fritz for tea, which was Wolfe-speak for I'm considering it. She opened her handbag and removed a thin leather envelope. She set it on the desk like it was ticking. Wolfe didn't. Touch it. Leave it. I shall not inspect it until I decide whether to accept your entreaty. She nodded. Then I'll wait for your answer. She left a minute later, and I walked her to the door. She smelled less like perfume now, and more like risk. Back in the office, Wolfe was glaring at the envelope like it had insulted his orchids. Well, I asked, what's the call? He frowned. A document can be counterfeited, a diamond can be replaced, but intention is harder to forge. That's a yes? It's an interest, he said, a dangerous one, which means we are no longer undisturbed. And just like that, the brownstone wasn't quite our own anymore. It was close to 6 when Fritz laid the linen on the dining room table and brought in the tomato bisque. Wolfe was still in the office, his chair aimed like a gun turret at the envelope Miss Albury had left behind. He hadn't touched it. He'd stared at it for a full hour like it was either a moral puzzle or a culinary offense, possibly both. When I nudged open the door to remind him that Fritz was plating the trout à la Meunière, Wolfe waved me in with a few fingers. His eyes didn't leave the desk. She is not an imbecile, he said, nor a coward. That is inconvenient. Would have been easier if she were, I asked, stepping inside. Much. Imbeciles act without artifice, cowards with two. Much. She acts with strategy. You think she's playing us? Wolfe grunted. I think she's already considered what I will and will not do. That makes her a manipulator, and manipulation is rarely lonely. I glanced down at the envelope. Still haven't opened it. No, that would indicate commitment. I leaned against the edge of the desk. We've got an envelope that may or may not contain a fortune in leverage, a client who used to ghostwrite inheritances, a missing mistress, and a son with a vault-sized motive, but no murder, yet. Not all crimes are bloody, he said. Some are merely elegant. Which kind is this? He shifted his weight in the chair. That remains to be seen. Now go eat before Fritz takes up arms. By the time Wolfe joined me at the table, the trout was barely warm, but he didn't mention it. He was thinking. I could see it in the way his fingers toyed with the napkin, like he was unspooling thread from a larger knot. Halfway through the tat-tatin, the doorbell rang. I looked up. "You expecting anyone?" "No." I went to the door and opened it to find a man in a camel overcoat, tall, sandy-haired, with cheekbones that looked like they'd been sketched by an angry architect. He didn't smile. "Mr. Goodwin?" "That depends," I said. "You selling?" "Something." He reached into his coat and produced a card. No flourish, just flat delivery. The card said, Charles D. Holt, Jr. I stared at it, then stared at him. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "We were just digesting you." He blinked. "Pardon?" "Inside joke. Right this way." He followed me to the office, hands in his coat pockets, like he wanted them somewhere closer to a weapon. Wolfe was still seated behind the desk, as if we'd been expecting this exact interruption. "Mr. Holt," Wolfe said, nodding once. "You arrive with poor timing and poorer manners." "I arrive with purpose," Holt replied. "I understand you received a visit today from a former attorney of my father's estate, Daphne Albury." "You understand incorrectly," Wolfe said. "I do not discuss my visitors, nor am I an emissary of the dead." Holt stepped closer, just enough for the brim of Wolfe's temper to lift. A fraction. I moved subtly, putting myself between the desk and our guest. Not that Wolfe needed guarding, just buffering. "My father's estate is in litigation," Holt said. "There are documents being weaponized. A promissory note, perhaps. Signed with diamonds." Wolfe's face was stone. "I'm not here to threaten you," Holt added. "I'm here to prevent a mistake." "That would require you to know what constitutes a mistake," Wolfe said. "I know Miss Albury has no legal right to that document, and I know if it falls into the wrong hands, it'll damage people who had nothing to do with the past." "And by wrong hands, you mean not yours," I offered. He turned to me. "I mean anyone outside the family." "That's what we call a red flag," I said. "Flying high, big wind." Wolfe exhaled. "Mr. Holt, do sit down. I dislike conversations that presume leverage." Holt hesitated, then took the red chair Miss Albury had used. Funny thing, he sat straighter, as if posture could make him more credible. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Why don't you tell me what precisely you think Miss Albury intends to do?" "She wants to find Elisa Lang," he said, "and deliver the note, which would entitle Miss Lang to half of a diamond cache my father promised during an unfortunate period." "Your words are diplomatic," Wolfe said, "and useless. If this is a matter of legal concern, why are you here in person?" Holt's jaw tightened. "Because if Miss Lang receives that note, she could reopen the entire estate under a claim of breach." "You assume she still exists," Wolfe said. "Miss Lang has not been seen in 5 years. That's a risk I'm not willing to take. And yet, here you are," I said, "trying to track down a note you insist has no power. You see the contradiction?" He stood abruptly. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm offering to purchase the document if it's in your possession. A fair sum, discreetly." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You are attempting to bribe me. I presume that offer was calculated with your attorney's knowledge." "No lawyers," Holt said. "Not for this." "Of course not," Wolfe said, "because then it would be official, and thus traceable." Holt's face hardened. "If you come across the document, you'll know how to reach me." Left the card. On the desk, right beside the envelope. Once he was gone, I shut the door and turned. That was either very brave or very dumb. Desperation is rarely intelligent, Wolfe said. You believe him? Wolfe looked at the two objects on the desk, Albury's envelope and Holt's card, like they were a matched set. I believe he believes himself, he said, which is always dangerous. I picked up the card. Should we call Saul, or wait until somebody throws a rock through the window? Neither, Wolfe said. Tomorrow you will visit Miss Albury, and then you will locate Elisa Lang. Find a ghost, easy. No, he said, reaching finally for the envelope. What comes next will be difficult, for all of us. I watched as he broke the seal with a silver blade from his desk drawer. He opened the flap with ceremonial slowness. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, crisp, notarized, aged just enough to suggest it hadn't been faked last week. He read it once, folded it again, and set it back down. Well, I asked. It is authentic, he said, and it is worth more than its weight in diamonds. He leaned back in his chair. The question, he added, is whether it should ever have been written. That's when I knew this wasn't just another inheritance spat. It was legacy warfare, and Wolfe had just taken the first step onto the battlefield. There's something about old money scandals that turns people either chatty or closed-lipped. I was betting Miss Daphne Albury would land squarely in the latter camp, but it was worth the visit. The next morning, after a breakfast that Wolfe insisted on delaying because his eggs had been over-peppered by Fritz's experimental enthusiasm, I was out the door with the envelope tucked in a leather folder and a mind ready for professional prodding. Her apartment was on the Upper West Side, 3 floors up in a stone building that pretended it had once housed diplomats, but had most likely seen more divorce attorneys than ambassadors. She answered the door without hesitation, which told me she'd been expecting me. You came alone, she said, stepping aside. If I'd brought Wolfe, he would have insisted on tea and a lecture. I figured one of us was enough. She wore a navy blouse and cigarette slacks, and this time the gloves were off, literally and figuratively. Her hands were neatly manicured, and I didn't see a tremble in sight. She motioned to a chair beside a low coffee table. Would you like coffee? I'd like honesty, but I'll settle for coffee if that's easier. She smirked and disappeared into the kitchen. When she came back, the mugs were plain, and the coffee tasted like it had survived law school with her. Strong, bitter, no apologies. I set the leather folder on the table. The note is real, I said. Wolfe verified it. He hasn't made a decision yet about next steps, but that may change depending on how this conversation goes. Do you trust me, Mr. Goodwin? No, but I trust Wolfe, and he doesn't call people liars unless he's sure. Then ask me your questions. I leaned back. Let's start with the obvious. How does a junior associate walk off with a signed promissory note involving diamonds and a vanished mistress? She didn't blink. I didn't walk off with it. I was asked to keep it off the books, but I still made a copy for the firm's archive, as required. When I left, 3 years later, I discovered the archive copy had been destroyed. Quietly. That's when I realized I might be holding the last one. Who asked you to keep it quiet? Mr. Holt Sr. himself. He didn't want it tied to the formal estate. He said it was a matter of personal promise, not legal entitlement. And Miss Lang? Elisa Lang was complicated. She wasn't just a mistress. She'd been a museum curator in Geneva, met Mr. Holt through a gem acquisition deal. According to what I heard, she turned down marriage but agreed to the promissory note when Holt promised she'd be secure if she ever needed it. Secure to the tune of diamonds? She gave a tight nod. She was discreet. He was powerful, and she had her reasons for staying off the radar. Such as, that I don't know, but she vanished after Holt Sr. died. No obituary, no sightings. She didn't even come to the funeral. It was as if she dissolved. I made a mental note to call Saul Panzer as soon as I got back. If Elisa Lang had breathed anywhere in the last 5 years, Saul could find the exhale. Let's move forward, I said. You kept the note. Why come to Wolfe now? Why not destroy it, or deliver it quietly? Because someone broke into my apartment and didn't take anything. Not cash, not jewelry, just rummaged. And whoever it was knew where to look. I glanced around the apartment. It was neat, curated, not the kind of place someone forgets to lock. You think it was Charles Holt? She sipped her coffee. I think it was someone he hired, but I can't prove it. And the firm I used to work for, they've clammed up. One of the senior partners called me last night, said I should let sleeping legacies lie. Their words. That's not ominous at all. I set my cup down and pulled out a notepad. Give me every detail you remember about Elisa. Lang. Not the legend. Just the woman. She was in her late 30s when I met her, Albury began. Polished French-Swiss accent. Always wore navy or black. No jewelry except a pearl pin. She once told me she considered gemstones her burden of provenance. I scribbled it down. What else? She loved birds. She mentioned once she'd rescued a wounded owl during her museum days. She also said she'd studied at the Sorbonne and worked in restoration before going into acquisitions. She kept her past clean. Too clean. Family. None she. Admitted to. No siblings, parents deceased. She lived in a brownstone in Geneva near Parc des Bastions. Discreet, expensive, nothing ostentatious. And her connection to Holt Sr. It was private but not secret. His wife knew, apparently. She even tolerated it. That's why the note was structured as it was. Only after the widow's death could Elisa claim it. It was designed to preserve the family peace. I whistled. The peace is clearly in pieces now. She nodded. Do you still want Wolfe to hold the note? I asked. She gave me a long look. It's safest with him, but I need to know who's hunting it. If Elisa's alive, she deserves to decide whether she wants to claim it. Not have it stolen or buried out of fear. Her voice cracked just slightly. It was the first sign of anything close to personal stake. You sound like you admired her, I said. I did. She was careful but never cruel. And she made Mr. Holt, an otherwise intimidating man, seem human. I stood. That's rare enough in this city. When I left, I made 2 calls from the payphone on the corner. First to Wolfe, giving him the highlights. Second to Saul Panzer. Need you to find someone, I told him. Name's Elisa Lang, missing 5 years, possibly in Switzerland or somewhere expensive. Try art circles, museums, old acquisitions records. She might have changed her name, or dropped off the grid intentionally. You want full background or just a trail? Trail, but I'll take the dirt if it's clean. He chuckled. You got it. Give me 48. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, eyes closed, fingertips together. Report, he said, without opening them. She's credible, I said. At least about Elisa. Lang. Holt Sr. was a romantic with trust issues. The note was real, the affair was known, and Lang's been a ghost since the old man died. Someone ransacked Albury's place, probably looking for it. I presume she gave you enough breadcrumbs to rouse Sol's appetite. He's on it. Good, until he reports we wait. I frowned. You planning to do nothing? On the contrary, he said, eyes opening slowly. I am preparing. For what? For the next move. We've disturbed a structure built on secrets. It will not remain still. I didn't argue. Wolfe might hate movement, but he knew how to make it happen. And judging by the knock on the door less than 5 minutes later, someone else had just felt the tremor. I've never seen Wolfe flinch when someone knocks at the front door. Usually he just waits for me to do my job, like a king waiting for the gong to announce visitors. But this knock, measured, firm, and a little too casual, made him lift. One eyebrow a fraction of an inch. That's Wolfe's version of high alert. I opened the door and found myself facing a woman who looked like she'd just walked out of a minimalist fashion catalogue. Slim, brunette, somewhere in her 40s, but with the kind of skin that makes people whisper words like preserved or money. Her eyes were icy blue and locked onto mine like she had already sized me up and filed me under functionally decorative. I'm here to speak with Mr. Wolfe, she said. Name? I asked, not moving an inch from the doorway. Giselle Arnaud. That meant nothing to me, but the name had a lilt I didn't trust. He's not currently conducting social calls. I'm not a social call, she said. I'm an art historian with information about Elisa Lang. That got me. I stepped aside. Then by all means, come wreck the afternoon. She moved like she'd been taught to walk by someone who choreographs museum docents, controlled, soundless, and somehow always perfectly aligned with the furniture. I took her coat, cashmere, pale beige, no visible label, which means it cost more. Wolfe didn't stand when she entered, of course, but he gave her the slow visual once-over he reserves for human puzzles. He motioned toward the red chair. Miss Arnaud, he said. Doctor, actually, she corrected, sitting gracefully. But I don't insist on it. Good, Wolfe said dryly. Your claim? I was a colleague of Elisa Lang during her years at the Musée de Gemologie in Lausanne. We worked together on several acquisitions. When I heard Mr. Holt's widow had passed, I suspected Elisa might surface again. She hasn't, which means she's either disappeared on purpose or something happened. Why come to me? Wolfe asked. Your profession does not normally intersect mine. She crossed her legs. Miss Albury and I shared a mutual acquaintance. When she mentioned she had entrusted a sensitive document to you, I realized you might now be in possession of the key to locating Elisa. You're rather well informed for a historian. I'm well connected, she said without apology. And I'm here because if someone else finds Elisa Lang before you do, they won't have questions. They'll have intentions. Yours being, I prompted. I want to protect her. Elisa's past is more complex than most suspect. Her relationship with Holt was built on shared necessity, not romance. Wolfe tapped a finger against the chair arm. Explain. Elisa was once married, Arnaud said. Briefly. It ended badly, and she kept it very quiet. The man was a collector, not of art, but of influence. She left him. She had to disappear. Holt offered her discretion in exchange for advice, investment in rare diamonds. That was news. I said, Are you suggesting Elisa wasn't a mistress at... All but a consultant with benefits? Arnaud hesitated. That's an unkind simplification, but structurally, yes. Holt respected her knowledge of provenance. She advised on private acquisitions, pieces bought through non-traditional channels. Smuggled? Wolfe asked. Not quite. Think reclaimed. Pieces without clean ownership histories that Holt wanted sanitized. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. So the promissory note was not just sentimental? No, she said. It was payment. For silence, for services. Possibly for protection. Does Charles Holt Jr. know this? I asked. Unlikely. He was kept away from those affairs. But I believe he suspects. Which makes him dangerous, Wolfe said flatly. Yes, Arnaud agreed. That's why I've come. I don't trust him. And I believe Elisa would contact you if she felt safe. If you find her, tell her I came. She'll remember me. We once shared an office and a bottle of brandy during a storm that closed down the museum for 2 days. She always trusted me after that. Wolfe made a small sound in his throat, one I'd catalogued as mild interest with a seasoning of doubt. Do you know where she might have gone? He asked. I can guess, Arnaud said. If she ran, it would be somewhere quiet, warm, and near the sea. She once said the only honest color was turquoise. I jotted that down. You're being helpful, I said. Why? Because someone broke into my flat in Paris last week, she said smoothly. Nothing taken, just disturbed, and the only files I've handled recently with any value are ones connected to Elisa. Wolfe frowned. You think Holt had you searched? I think someone wants to erase Elisa Lang before she reappears. She stood. That's all I have. But if you find her, please tell her Giselle hasn't forgotten. I walked her to the door. Charming, I said as I opened it. She paused. Be careful, Mr. Goodwin. You seem the sort who collects trouble. I gave her a grin. Only if it dresses well. When I returned, Wolfe was still frowning. She's withholding, he said. Agreed, but also telling the truth, the selective kind. I dislike partial truths, Wolfe muttered. They require more digestion than Fritz's souffle. You thinking the diamonds were part of a laundering scheme? I'm thinking Holt Sr. used Elisa for more than companionship, and the note was his final insurance. I paced. That makes this less about inheritance and more about leverage, which means Holt Jr. isn't just trying to protect the estate. He might be trying to bury a scandal. Or protect himself, Wolfe said. If those diamonds were involved in illicit transactions, their rediscovery would open inquiries. He cannot afford. We sat in silence for a minute. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the faint creak of Wolfe's leather chair as he shifted. Then the phone rang. I picked it up. Brownstone. Goodwin speaking. Sol, came the voice. I've got something. Talk. Elisa Lang booked passage on a steamer from Marseille to Algiers 3 years ago. No return trip on record. Traveled under the name Eleanor Vigna. It's a name she used before. Found it tied to a gem symposium 20 years ago. She alive? Too soon to say. But someone else is looking. A man matching Charles Holt Jr.'s description arrived in Marseille last week. Quiet, but not invisible. I glanced at Wolfe. Get to Algiers, Wolfe said quietly. Confirm if she's there, but discreetly. Saul agreed and hung up. I turned. You think Holt's trying to find her before we do? No, Wolfe said. I think he already knows where she is. But he needs proof she can't return. And if she does? Wolfe closed his eyes. Then the diamonds are the least of his problems. I sat down, tension itching behind my ears. Outside, the late afternoon light was starting to dim. And inside, the walls of the brownstone were holding more secrets than ever before. There are two kinds of silence in Nero Wolfe's office. The first is when he's deep in thought and wants the world to behave accordingly, which is often. The second is when he's listening so hard he forgets he's supposed to pretend he's disinterested. That was the kind of silence filling the room after Saul's call from Algiers. Wolfe sat with his eyes closed, but I could practically see the gears in his head turning, slow, precise, and just shy of ominous. I didn't say a word. I knew better. Fritz interrupted the tension with a polite cough from the doorway. "Dinner is ready, sir." Wolfe opened one eye. "Very well, inform me if the sauce has been altered." "It has not," Fritz replied with quiet dignity. Dinner passed mostly in silence, except for Wolfe's singular grunt of approval at the duck confit. It wasn't until the pears poached in red wine appeared that he finally spoke again. "She is not simply in hiding," he said. "She is being hidden." "You mean Lang?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "A woman does not vanish into Algiers under an old alias unless someone is aiding the disappearance. That someone is either benevolent or frightened, possibly both." "And Holt Jr.?" "He is not traveling to retrieve her. He is traveling to confirm something. Her death or her inability to speak. That didn't sit well with me. I like missing. Person's better when they're missing on purpose. After dinner I headed back to the office to review the notes I'd made. Names, locations, connections. I paused when I reached the folder containing the promissory note. Wolfe had returned it to the top drawer of his desk. A locked drawer. Of course, with a key that rarely left his vest pocket. On impulse, I opened the other drawers, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. Every now and then, Wolfe forgets where he puts something, and it falls to me to extract it like a file clerk with a gun license. That's when I noticed something. Second drawer down, tucked between old invoices, and a rolled map of Budapest. I didn't remember seeing before was a small flat leather pouch. Nothing fancy, just old and worn. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a brooch, but not the usual sort of thing. It was shaped like a scarab, gold-plated with a turquoise stone in the center. Delicate, detailed, and definitely out of place. I brought it to Wolfe. "Yours?" He looked up from the book he was pretending not to reread for the third time. "No." "Then what's it doing in your drawer?" He frowned, set the book aside, and examined the piece. For a moment I thought I saw the faintest twitch of unease. That in itself was newsworthy. "This is Lang's," he said quietly. I blinked. "How would you know that?" "She wore it during a brief interview Holt Sr. once gave. There was a photograph, obscure, European Financial Digest. The scarab was pinned to her collar." I felt my jaw tighten. "Then someone's been in here." "Yes," Wolfe said, "while we were at dinner. The idea of someone breaking into Wolfe's office, into his sanctuary, was like hearing someone had spray-painted a sonnet onto the Mona Lisa." Wolfe stood. Actually stood. He moved around the desk and opened each drawer one by one. Nothing else was touched, nothing else missing. Just the scarab, planted or misplaced. "That's not theft," I said. "That's a message." "Indeed," he murmured. But from whom and why? I scanned the room. No signs of forced entry. Fritz didn't see anyone. No window disturbed. Whoever did it had a key, or an invitation. Wolfe's scowl deepened. Call Mr. Kramer. That took me by surprise. You want the police? No, he said. I want someone to know we've been trespassed, and Kramer will enjoy hearing it. I dialed Inspector Kramer, who listened in near silence, then muttered something impolite about our tendency to attract drama and promised to send a man by in the morning. When I hung up, Wolfe returned to his chair. Someone close to Elisa has betrayed her, he said. How do you figure? The scarab is not a threat. It is a symbol, a claim. It says, I know where she is, and I know you're getting close. I sat down. Then why not destroy the note? Because the note is still leverage, Wolfe said. Someone wants her contained, not erased. If she returns, they'll use the note to silence her or extract terms. That doesn't sound like Holt Jr. No, Wolfe said, he's too direct. This is subtle, insinuation. Someone with ties to Lang. Someone afraid of what she might say if she comes forward. My brain turned over the people we'd met. Daphne Albury, Giselle Arnaud. Even the firm she used to work for, though no names, had emerged yet. You think Giselle left it? No, she wouldn't risk subtlety. That brooch was planted by someone who knows this office, who timed it for absence, and who understands symbolic pressure. We sat in silence for a long time, the scarab sitting between us like a forgotten heirloom. Eventually I stood. I'll check the locks, I said. And the orchid rooms, Wolfe added, though I doubt the intruder had floral intentions. I made a sweep. Nothing out of place. No fingerprints on the doorknob, no signs of tampering. The place was locked tighter than a banker's conscience. When I returned, Wolfe was in his chair again, the brooch still on the table, untouched. We're being warned, he said, or watched. Perhaps both, he conceded. Then he looked at me, direct, quiet, and heavy. Tomorrow you'll go to Holt's firm. Find out who handled the Holt estate. Speak with no one but the archivist. If there's a shadow in the records, it will be there. You want subtle? Subtle, Mr. Goodwin, but thorough. I nodded, pocketed my notebook, and killed the lights on the way out. The scarab stayed on the table, gleaming faintly under the low lamp. It didn't move, but I felt its weight even after I left the room. Something had been stirred, and Wolfe, for all his silence, was beginning to lean forward, mentally if not physically. Whatever was buried in the Holt legacy wasn't staying buried much longer. If there's a rule book for digging discreetly through the affairs of billionaires, nobody ever lent me a copy. But you learn to improvise. The next morning, with a sharpened pencil, 2 clean shirts, and a double espresso from Fritz that could have fueled a small plane, I headed downtown to the offices of the Holt family's legal firm, Macklin, Rourke, and Sutter. The building was all brushed steel and reinforced glass. The kind of place that doesn't bother with a welcome mat because it assumes you were invited by someone expensive. I gave my name to the receptionist, who blinked twice before deciding I probably wasn't dangerous. She directed me to the 5th floor, records and historical archiving. The elevator opened to a quieter wing, less chrome, more mahogany. Dust lingered here like it paid rent. A small brass plaque read, Harold G. Emery, Senior Archivist. I knocked. Emery was in his 60s, balding, and wore wire-rimmed glasses that he kept adjusting whether they needed it or not. He looked like someone who'd spent a career trying not to get blamed for anything. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked when I stepped. "Tairty in the flesh," I said. "I'm doing a private review on behalf of Mr. Wolfe. We're looking into the legacy documents from the Holt estate, specifically peripheral holdings, side trusts, and undeclared promissories. I was told you might help me trace some of the less canonical paperwork." His fingers twitched at the word undeclared. "I'm afraid most of that is highly restricted." "Not asking for files," I said. "Just your memory. Discreet professional memory. For example, Daphne Albury. She was junior counsel here during the Holt years, right?" He nodded cautiously. "Yes, she left amicably." "Any issues with her retention of client documents?" He adjusted his glasses. "There was a matter of a draft agreement that never reached formal record, internal, sensitive. When she departed, a few of us questioned whether she had access to certain documents outside firm purview, but nothing came of it." I leaned forward slightly. "What kind of document?" "A handwritten promissory note, if I recall. It was never fully logged. It lacked a date. Some saw it as a favor between parties, not a formal obligation." "Between Holt Sr. and—" "I'm afraid I don't recall the woman's name," he said, too quickly. "You're certain?" He hesitated. "There was a whisper, Elisa Lang, but nothing in writing. Only spoken references during internal meetings. The senior partners were, how shall I put this, deliberately forgetful." "Any idea who buried the archive copy?" He sighed. "The order came down informally. The phrasing was clean, up the shadows. Albury was already gone by then. It was one of those things we were encouraged not to question." "Who gave the order?" "A partner named Winston Sutter. He retired not long after." I scribbled his name down. "Last question," I said. "Have you seen anyone here recently asking about the Holt records? Maybe someone who didn't go through the front desk?" That got a pause, then a reluctant nod. "2 days ago, a woman, mid-40s, brunette, French accent, asked to see the artifact register tied to the Holt acquisition files." "Giselle Arnaud?" "I didn't catch the name, but it sounds right." "She leave with anything?" "No. But she wasn't pleased when she left." "Interesting." I thanked Emery, left him with a business card Wolfe never uses, and made my way back outside. The air was warmer than expected, like the city was trying to sweat secrets to the surface. I called Wolfe from a payphone. "She was here," I said. "Giselle asked for artifact files, was told no." "Curious," he murmured. "And the firm did delete an internal record of the note, quietly, on Sutter's orders." "Is Sutter reachable?" "Retired. Lives in Connecticut." "Then he must be disturbed," Wolfe said. "But first, return. I have received something of interest." He hung up. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was seated with a thin envelope on the desk. Not the same one Albury had brought. This one was addressed to Wolfe himself and postmarked from Marseille. He handed it to me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single note, handwritten on creamy stationery. It read, "If you value discretion, abandon your search. She is safe, and safer still if she is not remembered. The diamonds are nothing. It is her memory that must remain buried." No signature, no return address. I passed it back. Wolfe held it between 2 fingers like it might leave a stain. "This was not written in panic," he said. "It was composed. That's intention. You think she's alive? Yes, and someone close to her is speaking on her behalf. Or for her. He nodded once. I sat down. So we've got a promissory note drafted for services related to high-value diamonds. A woman who disappears after her benefactor dies. A legal firm that buries her existence. A partner who quits. A French historian who knows more than she shares. And now a scarab brooch shows up in your drawer like a calling card. All signs of careful choreography, Wolfe said. This is not the clumsy plotting of a man like Holt Jr. This is the work of someone accustomed to manipulating records, reputations, and memories. I frowned. You're thinking Arnaud? Possibly, or someone adjacent to her, someone with access to both Elisa Lang's past and present. We both stared at the note again. It says she's safe, I murmured. But it doesn't. Say she's willing. No, Wolfe said, which is why we must find her. I stood. Then I'll find Sutter. Wolfe didn't argue. As I grabbed my coat, he said, Be cautious. Whoever wrote that letter believes they are protecting her. That belief can be dangerous. Understood. And Archie, he added, his voice unusually quiet. There's more than money. Buried here. This is about shame. And fear. I nodded. Outside, the city hummed as usual. Cabs growled, horns brayed, pedestrians moved like blood through arteries that never stopped pulsing. But somewhere beneath all that noise, I had the feeling something older was shifting, something with memory, and secrets sharp enough to cut. The drive to Connecticut gave me time to think, which is usually fine in theory and terrible in practice. Thoughts have a way of breeding in traffic, especially the kind of thoughts Wolfe tends to provoke with cryptic phrases like, "This is about shame," or "dangerous belief." I'd packed a small recorder in my pocket, in case the retired lawyer proved slippery, and brought along 2 fresh cigars Wolfe had reluctantly parted with, as gifts or bribes, depending on how things went. Winston Sutter's house sat on a slope, outside Ridgefield, screened by manicured hedges and a gate that opened after only 1 ring, too smoothly to have been forgotten. A security camera tracked my arrival, and the intercom crackled with a woman's voice telling me to proceed up the drive. The house was glass and cedar, the kind of modernist design you only get away with when you've billed enough hours to afford regret. Sutter answered the door himself. Tall, lean, pale in a way that suggested indoor living, he wore a navy cardigan and held a brandy snifter, like it might warm more than just his hands. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you come on behalf of Nero Wolfe." "Correct," I said, "and I come respectfully, but I also became curious." He waved me inside. The place smelled like varnished wood and retirement. "You found me on a calm day," he said. "Normally I'd be out with my dogs." "No sign of them," I said, looking around. He smiled faintly. "They don't like strangers." We sat in a sunken den lined with legal tomes, art books, and a single oil painting of a mountain that looked vaguely offended. I handed him the cigar. He accepted it, examining the label like it had credentials. "What does Wolfe want?" he asked finally. "Truth," I said, "about the promissory note drawn up by Holt Sr. to Elisa Lang, and about who decided it. Should be deleted from the firm's record." He took a slow sip of brandy. "Mr. Wolfe must already know that discretion was the foundation of that document. Why disturb the dead?" I shrugged. because the living are still fighting about. Archie, he set the glass down. There was no formal filing, he said. No witness ledger. Just a quiet instruction passed verbally. The document was known to exist, but not referenced in the estate plan. When Holt's widow passed, we were told to assume it was void. By whom? Charles Holt, Jr. I leaned forward. And you obeyed? He nodded once. I did. But not because I was bribed or intimidated, because I knew what the note concealed. I waited. Elisa Lang wasn't just Holt's mistress or gem advisor. She was a laundress of assets, not dirty money, but questionable stones. Gems recovered, under ambiguous provenance. Museum deaccessions that never made the papers. Lang had ties to collectors across Europe, some of whom owed more to wartime shadows than daylight trades. She was cleaning them. He nodded, through Holt, who then converted them into vaultable commodities, diamonds in Swiss storage. The note was her protection, yes, but also her liability. If exposed, it would implicate more than Holt. Like you? He gave me a dry smile. I never touched the transactions, but I knew about them. And I suspected that if Lang ever resurfaced, she'd bring shadows with her. Why now? I asked. Why is Holt Jr. chasing her if the threat's been dormant? Because, Sutter said slowly, he just learned that Lang has something else, a ledger. A ledger. Her private record, not just of the gems, but of the deals, the names, the exchanges, the people protected. You ever see it? No. But I believe it exists. And now Holt wants it. Sutter nodded. He doesn't want to kill her, he said. He wants to bargain with her, or control her, or scare her silent. But if she talks, if that ledger surfaces, the Holt name becomes radioactive. I stood. Thank you. He raised his glass. Tell Mr. Wolfe that some ghosts should remain spectral. I left him staring out the window, as if waiting, for a storm that had already passed, but might come back wearing new shoes. Back in the car, I made 2 calls. First to Wolfe, who listened, grunted, and hung up after saying, "Return." That was Wolfe for "well done." Second to Saul Panzer, who'd reached Algiers by then and sounded like he'd had better coffee on airplanes. "She's here," he said without greeting. "Lang, I saw her entering a clinic on the west edge of the city. New name, Eleanor. Fine, but definitely her. She looks older, thinner, but it's her. She's sick? Don't think so, but she's cautious. Talks to no one. Lives in a villa up the hill. High walls, no staff. Keeps a falcon." "A falcon?" "Don't ask. Anyone watching her?" "Yes, a man in a pale linen suit. Been loitering on the same bench for 3 days. Local intel says he speaks French with an American accent. Holt Jr.? Possibly, or someone he hired." I gripped the wheel tighter. "Stay close, but do not approach her yet. Wolfe may want a different angle." "Understood." I made it back to the brownstone just as the sun was knifing between rooftops. Wolfe was in the office, the scarab brooch still resting in the same exact spot on the desk, untouched, like it was waiting. "She's alive," I said, closing the door behind me. "Living under an alias. Saul confirms it, and she's being watched." "Then we must act," Wolfe said, "before her silence is purchased or enforced." I told him about the ledger. His eyes, half-lidded, sharpened immediately. "That is the fulcrum," he said. "The ledger holds motive, leverage, history. It is both the map And the bomb. And Holt Jr. wants it before it surfaces. Yes, Wolfe said, but so does someone else. Perhaps Giselle, perhaps Daphne, perhaps even Sutter himself. Anyone who touched that world may fear exposure. He reached for the phone. Whom are you calling? I asked. Lescure, he said. Lescure? A client, formerly of the French consulate, now a curator. He owes me a favor. He will contact Lang gently, discreetly. She must hear from someone she doesn't fear. And if she refuses, then we bring her here. My eyes widened. Here you'd bring her to the brownstone. If necessary, I would rather be invaded than ignorant. That, from Wolfe, was practically sacrificial. He paused. Archie, this is no longer a case of a document. It is a case of memory, of moral debts compounded. What do we do next? He closed his eyes. We prepare the office, he said. We will soon have guests. I didn't know if he meant Lang, Holt, or the truth. But I locked the front door tighter that night, because whatever was coming next, it already knew our address. Some men rearrange furniture when they're nervous. Wolfe rearranges silence. That night, the brownstone felt tighter, as if the walls were listening. I caught him in the plant room twice, staring at his orchids like they'd grown secrets. Fritz moved quietly through dinner service, sensing the current. Even the roast duck with Madeira glaze, Wolfe's third favourite comfort dish, barely got a comment. After dinner, I stepped into the office to find Wolfe still seated at his desk, the scarab brooch unmoved, and the envelope with the promissory note still locked away. The note had now become something else, something volatile. We weren't just holding paper. We were holding the match. She will not come to us, Wolfe said suddenly, his voice as dry as the air in the orchid room. Elisa? Yes. Even if Lescure contacts her, and he will, she is too conditioned by caution. She has built her world on quiet retreat. Movement now would imply fear or exposure, and she cannot afford either. She trusts no one. No, not even herself, I suspect. I sat down. Then what's our move? We don't move, he said. We bait. That sounds riskier than usual. It is, but we cannot draw her by force. We must make the others move first. Holt, Arno, even Albury. What are we baiting them with? Wolfe tapped the armrest. With a single sentence, publicly phrased, carefully leaked, one that suggests the ledger is not just real, but retrieved. You want to flush the shadows? Exactly. Whoever moves first to contain it will expose themselves, and they will come to us. That is how we find the true steward of the legacy. I stood. Then I'll call Lon Cohen. He's always happy to run a quiet item in the Gazette. Precisely. Tell him you've acquired new information tied to the Holt inheritance. A private logbook with implications for multiple parties. No names, just implication. You think that'll bring them? No, Wolfe said. I know it will. I made the call. Lon didn't ask for details. He never does when the bait smells good enough. He agreed to run a sidebar the next morning, buried in the financial briefs under the headline, Rumours Stir Around Holt Estate Ledger. By 10 the next morning we had our first visitor, Daphne Albury. She rang the bell at 10:06 earlier. Then anyone who values discretion should arrive. I answered and found her looking pale beneath a wool cloche, clutching her handbag like it was leaking. "You've made things worse," she said, as I closed the door behind her. "I try," I said. "Come on in." She moved fast right past me and into the office. Wolfe barely looked up as she took the red chair again. This time she didn't sit as confidently. She perched. "You've made this explosive," she said. "I've made it honest," Wolfe replied, which rarely feels polite. "Do you have the ledger?" He didn't blink. "Do you?" That caught her off guard. Her hands tightened slightly around the bag. "No," she said, "but you know it exists." I suspected. Elisa once mentioned keeping notes, private ones. I warned her not to. She said it was her insurance. Against Holt? No, against his wife. She feared being erased. Ironic now. "She is being erased," Wolfe said, "carefully, thoroughly, with help." Daphne went quiet. I leaned forward. "You're not just a lawyer in this, Miss Albury. You're a participant." "In what?" she snapped. "In the preservation of something that never should have existed. Holt's private empire of gems, favors, and whispered promises. And Elisa Lang, the record-keeper who chose exile over exposure." "She's not a criminal," Albury said, low and firm. "No," Wolfe said, "but she enabled them." Albury sat back, as if that had been a blow. "You think I'm—" "Hiding something," she murmured. "I know you are," Wolfe said. "The question is whether you're hiding to protect her, or to protect yourself." She stood abruptly. "If you push this, people will get hurt." "They already have," Wolfe replied. She left without another word. At noon, the 2nd. Knock came. This one was expected. "Charles Holt, Jr." I answered the door with the kind of smile you reserve for a man who'd prefer to enter with a crowbar. He wore a charcoal coat and looked less polished than before, not rattled, just unfinished. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he said. "Funny," I replied. "Most threats come in bigger envelopes." I let him in. He didn't sit this time. He stood in the middle of the office like a man trying to measure a fire's distance by scent. "You don't have it," he said. "You wouldn't have published that if you did." "You're sure?" Wolfe asked. "Because if you had it, you'd be negotiating, not signaling." Wolfe looked at him calmly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps we enjoy the performance." Holt's jaw worked. "Elisa Lang left that world. She buried it. She doesn't want this." "She doesn't get to choose," Wolfe said. "Not anymore, because others are choosing for her." Holt pointed a finger. "If you bring her back, if you put her in front of reporters or lawyers, you'll do more than burn the Holt name. You'll destroy everything she tried to build. She's not your tool." "No," Wolfe said. "She is the key." Holt turned toward me. "Do you understand what you're doing? You're opening vaults that were sealed for a reason." "I open what I'm paid to open," I said, "and I sleep better when people stop lying." He turned on his heel and walked out. When the door clicked shut, Wolfe finally exhaled. "He is desperate," he said. "He's also right," I replied. "If Lang comes back, she doesn't just expose them, she burns herself too." "That," Wolfe said, "is why she must decide. Not Holt, not Arno, not Albury. The two." Phone rang. It was Saul. "She's agreed," he said. "Lang." After Lescure contacted her, she asked one question. "Will Wolfe protect me?" When he said yes, she packed her bag. "Is she coming here?" "She'll arrive tomorrow. Quiet flight. I'll accompany her." I relayed the message. Wolfe nodded once. "Prepare the office," he said. "She will need a room for truth." And just like that, after all the whispers, threats, and planted relics, The woman at the center of it all was coming. Elisa Lang, and with her everything we'd been circling. Memory, motive, and the legacy no one wanted named. Elisa Lang. Arrived at the brownstone just after 9 the next morning. The town car pulled up quietly. No fanfare, no trailing eyes from across the street. Saul Panzer got out first, gave me a brief nod and opened the rear door. She stepped out with the caution of someone who had crossed more borders than she'd ever admit. She wore a deep grey coat, unadorned but finely cut, and carried no luggage, just a black satchel tucked under one arm. Her face was older than the photos I'd seen, but not by much. What age had added, discretion had preserved. Her eyes were sharp, dark, and so watchful, I almost felt the questions before she asked them. "You're Archie Goodwin?" she said, soft but steady. In the slightly cynical flesh, I said, "And you're safe here." She gave me the kind of look that had nothing to do with trust and everything to do with necessity. Then she stepped inside. Wolfe was already waiting in the office, of course. When she entered, he didn't rise, but he did incline his head, which from Wolfe is the social equivalent of a standing ovation. "Miss Lang," he said, "or would you prefer Madame Vigne?" "Elisa will do," she replied, taking the red chair like she remembered its twin in another life. "You've come a long way," Wolfe said. "I've been running for a long time," she corrected, "but I am tired of it." Saul took a seat near the bookshelf and said nothing. That was his way of saying everything had gone smoothly, or as close to smooth as international flight, aliases, and moral ambiguity ever allow. "I assume you know why we asked you here," Wolfe said. Elisa smiled faintly. "Because the world I buried is clawing its way back. And you have something it wants." She nodded and slowly opened the satchel. From it she produced a flat, worn notebook, bound in deep blue linen. It looked like something you'd find in a curator's office, or behind glass at an auction. She placed it on Wolfe's desk with the kind of care you give to unexploded ordnance. "The ledger," she said. "Every transaction, every stone, every name." I stared. So did Saul. Wolfe, of course, remained impassive, though his left thumb tapped once against the chair arm, which for him was practically gasping. "You kept it all these years?" I asked. "I had to. It was the only proof of what Holt did and what I helped him do." "Why now?" Wolfe asked. "Because you published a lie to provoke the truth," she said, looking directly at him. "And it worked. I've never felt hunted quite like this. They're scared now." "You speak of Holt Jr.? Him, yes, but not only him. There are names in that book he doesn't even know. Bankers, traders, one diplomat even. If this ledger sees the light of day, careers collapse. Legacies die." "And yours?" Wolfe asked. She didn't flinch. "Mine dies either way." Silence stretched for a moment. Then she added, "I didn't come for redemption. I came to make a choice." Wolfe nodded slightly. "What would you have me do?" "Keep it. Hold it until I decide. Or until someone does something that forces your hand. I trust you, Mr. Wolfe. Not to protect me, but to protect the truth." "You believe in truth." "I believe in balance," she said, "and I'm done tipping it." Wolfe opened the ledger with a reverence normally reserved for recipes by Fritz or ancient horticultural texts. His eyes skimmed the pages, diamonds logged by carat and source, locations by city and vault, transactions annotated with a single telling word, cleaned. Then he closed the book and laid his palm on it like a benediction. "I will protect it," he said. At that moment, the front door buzzer sounded. I left the room and answered it. This time it was Giselle Arnaud. No appointment, no smile. "I know she's here," she said without waiting for permission, "and I won't let her walk into this fire alone." "You weren't invited," I replied. "Then revoke me after I speak." She walked past, coat fluttering like a punctuation mark. Back in the office, she stopped just inside the threshold and looked at Elisa Lang as if she were seeing a ghost who'd aged without permission. "You look well," Giselle said quietly. "I'm not," Elisa replied. "I warned you." "And I came anyway," Wolfe cut in. "Ladies, we are not here for reparations. We are here for decisions." Giselle turned to him. "Then here is mine. I have copies of the ledger." That was a surprise. "Excuse me?" I said. "I made them," Giselle continued. "Years ago, when Elisa first left, I suspected she'd be hunted someday, and I wanted leverage in case I had to protect her or expose someone else." "So you've been sitting on this?" I asked. "I sat because she asked me to, and because I feared it more than I feared anyone named Holt." "Where are the copies now?" Wolfe asked. "Locked away, safe." Wolfe looked to Elisa. "Did you know?" "I suspected," she said, "but I didn't ask." Giselle stepped forward and laid her hand beside the ledger on the desk. "If you use it wisely, because once it's public, it never returns to silence." Wolfe stared at both women. "Then you have a choice to make." "No," Elisa said. "You do." She stood, turned toward Wolfe, and looked him straight in the eye. "I came here to be free of it. Give it to someone who won't flinch." Wolfe considered that for a long moment, then finally spoke. "I will not publish it. I will not destroy it. I will hold it, and decide when the truth serves justice, not vengeance." "That's enough," Elisa said, and for her it seemed it was. The room sat still after that. Giselle stepped back. Saul exhaled, and Wolfe reached again for the ledger, not to read it, but simply to keep it close. Outside, the afternoon had deepened into gray. I walked both women to the door, no words needed. When I returned, Wolfe was still seated, eyes closed, fingers tented. "You believe her?" I asked. "I believe they both are telling the truth they can live with." "And the ledger?" He opened a drawer and placed it inside, locking it with a click that echoed louder than expected. "It stays here," he said, "until someone does. Something so reprehensible that silence becomes the greater sin." I sat down. "Do you think that's coming?" He opened his eyes. "I think it's already on the way. Nero Wolfe isn't fond of theatre, unless it's horticultural. But every now and then even he arranges the kind of performance that deserves a curtain call. This was one of those times. The chairs had been placed with geometric precision in the office, 5 in total, arranged like witnesses waiting for their verdict. The door was unlocked at precisely 3:45 p.m., which, according to Wolfe, gave guests the illusion of casual timing while still ensuring control. One by one they came. First was Daphne Albury. She wore black again, this time with gloves and a hat. Mourning or strategy, hard to tell. She nodded at me without warmth and took the first chair to the right. Then Giselle Arnaud, trench coat immaculate, expression neutral. Her heels made no sound on the rug. She didn't acknowledge Daphne. Charles Holt Jr. arrived third. He said nothing to either woman, and nothing to me beyond a nod that landed somewhere between contempt and fatigue. His coat had the faint smell of cologne and tension. Last came Saul Panzer. Not an official guest, but Wolfe had asked him to remain. Not for muscle, Saul didn't do that, but for presence. The kind that quiets a room without raising a voice. At 4:01, Wolfe entered. He didn't look hurried, he never does. He moved behind his desk, adjusted his cuffs, and sat. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You are here because the matter we have all danced around is no longer pliable. It must be addressed, formally and with finality." Nobody replied. He continued. "The ledger exists. It is here. I have read it. I have confirmed its authorship and its accuracy. What it contains is not simply a financial record, but a catalogue of omission. Gems traded through quiet hands, values inflated or erased, reputations manufactured." He turned slightly toward Daphne. "You knew the note was real. You helped structure it, but you did not destroy the copy you retained. Why?" She inhaled. "Because part of me believed Elisa would return, and part of me knew that one day someone would try to erase her. Yet you came to me not with that fear, but with the pretense of protection." She looked down. "I miscalculated the scale." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Now you must choose whether your loyalty is to the client who paid you or the woman you once respected." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. Wolfe turned to Giselle. "You made copies of the ledger. You withheld that knowledge. You waited until the situation became unbearable, then offered it as insurance." Giselle met his gaze evenly. It wasn't time. She was still a shadow then. "And now?" "She stepped into the light," she said. "So I followed." Wolfe gave a brief nod, then turned to Holt. "Mr. Holt, your role has been more direct. You sought to suppress this history, first through retrieval, then through intimidation. You visited this house, you offered payment, you issued veiled threats, and now you sit, still wondering if you can control what comes next." Holt leaned forward. "I don't deny any of it." Wolfe arched an eyebrow. "Then explain yourself." "My father built something powerful," Holt said. "He used questionable methods, yes, but what he built employs thousands, funds charities, fuels industry. If that ledger is released, it doesn't just destroy his name, it scorches the earth." "That is not my concern," Wolfe replied. "What concerns me is that your attempts to silence Elisa Lang placed her in danger. That someone was sent to observe her and possibly worse." Holt's eyes flared. "I never authorized that." "Then someone did, and under your banner." He turned to me. "Mr. Goodwin." I handed Wolfe the printed sheet. He unfolded it and began to read. "This is a communication intercepted from an offshore account linked to a private contractor." The instruction was clear. "Secure subject if found. Silence preferable to negotiation. Legacy must not surface." Wolfe looked up. "That instruction was issued from a terminal connected to your firm's Geneva office." Holt's face lost a shade. "I didn't authorize that." "But it was authorized," Wolfe said, "by someone with access. Which means either you are complicit or you have lost control." That landed like a hammer. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Wolfe continued. "The ledger will not be published, not yet, but it will be held by me, and it will be referenced. If necessary, should further attempts to pressure or harm Miss Lang occur." He looked around the room. "If anyone wishes to object, you are free to try." Nobody did. "Miss Lang has chosen to step back again. She will not testify. She will not reappear in your world. But if she is pursued, even indirectly, I will consider the terms of silence void." Daphne looked up. "You're playing God, Mr. Wolfe." "No," he said calmly. "I am playing balance." Giselle stood. "She deserves peace." Wolfe nodded. "Then leave her in it." Charles Holt rose, slow, heavy, and for the first time looked tired rather than dangerous. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Disengagement," Wolfe said. "Publicly and privately, you will not seek the ledger. You will not litigate its ownership. You will cease inquiries through any affiliate or firm." Holt nodded. "Once." "And if I don't?" "Then," Wolfe said, "I publish everything." That ended the meeting. I escorted them out one by one. Daphne left first, quiet and unreadable. Giselle followed, pausing only once to say, "You were a fine gatekeeper, Mr. Goodwin." I tipped an invisible hat. Charles Holt Jr. was last. He said nothing as he passed, but his look said everything. When I returned, Wolfe was back in his chair. Saul stood, stretching. "You think it holds?" I asked Wolfe. "Yes," he said. "Because it must." I nodded. Fritz brought in the tray, roast quail with juniper berries and a chilled Riesling. We ate in silence. Afterward, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. "People are like diamonds," he said. "Hard, clear, but flawed beneath the cut." "And easy to lose," I added. "Precisely," he said. The ledger stayed locked, in the drawer. The brownstone returned to its usual calm. But for once the quiet had weight, because somewhere in the dark a legacy had just been preserved, not by power, but by choice. And Wolfe, immovable as ever, had done it all from his chair. It was a Thursday, which meant trout for lunch and tyrants for dessert. The brownstone had returned to its usual rhythm. Fritz was back to humming in the kitchen. The orchids had recovered from Wolfe's anxious overwatering. Saul had gone back to his usual city rounds, and the front door had remained closed for nearly 24 hours, a record that Wolfe regarded as both a blessing and a warning. In our line of work, peace doesn't last. It lingers like the aftertaste of a bitter liqueur, never fully welcome, always temporary. The ledger remained in Wolfe's drawer, untouched since the last confrontation. Not that it was forgotten. You could feel its presence in the room like a sleeping dog that might bite if stirred too quickly. Elisa Lang had vanished again, this time with Wolfe's approval. She was now staying at a private retreat owned by Lecueur's cousin, somewhere in the Luberon Hills. No phones, no reporters, no names on the mailbox. Just air, wine, and silence. She'd left behind a letter for Wolfe. I found it on his desk. The morning after the office gathering, placed neatly between his blotter and the dictionary, it read, "You did not judge me. That's rarer than kindness. If the world forgets me, I won't mind. But if you ever feel the need to speak for me, do it with facts, not forgiveness." He hadn't responded. Wolfe doesn't write letters unless it's to insult a publisher or order an obscure route from Brazil. But he kept the note. That said enough. Mid-morning, the phone rang. It was Lon Cohen at the Gazette. "Archie," he said, "I've got a story coming in that you might want to prep Wolfe for." "Coming in from where?" "Geneva, financial leak from a disbanded trust. A series of shell companies linked to Holt's father. some of which match entries you once hinted at, though never confirmed. Confirmed now? Enough that someone's going to print it, and when they do, Holt's name won't be. The only one in bold. I whistled. You have the list? Partial. 3 names already exposed. But the real kicker, a code within the gem shipment documents. They match Elisa Lang's private curation codes, embedded across vault logs from Zurich, Antwerp, and Dubai. So it's real. Oh, it's very real, and somebody's made it louder. I hung up and gave Wolfe the update. He sat still for a long time. Then he murmured, "It was not Lang. She would not betray her own condition. Ah, no. No. She feared the ledger as much as she protected it." Then who? I suspect, Wolfe said, that someone in Holt's organization, perhaps alarmed by recent events, decided to strike preemptively, to control the scandal by sacrificing the old sins. If the world sees it as past misjudgment rather than present malice, the damage can be contained. So they leaked it themselves. Yes, sanitized shame, the modern disease. And us? He opened his eyes. We become a footnote. I paced the room. You okay with that? I am not paid to be remembered, he said. Only to finish. At 2 Bowen the mail arrived. Wolfe rarely checks it himself. He has systems, and I'm usually at the top of the chain. But today he opened the envelope himself. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white, grainy. Elisa Lang, seated at a cafe table in what looked like North Africa, sun in her hair. A falcon perched on her gloved arm. She was smiling. On the back was written in neat cursive, "I let him go, the bird, not the past." Wolfe passed it to me. Well, I said, at least someone in this mess found a little peace. He nodded. Peace is best found in exile. I was about to crack wise when the doorbell rang. Kramer. Inspector Lionel Kramer does not do social visits. He doesn't even do polite ones. But when I opened the door, he was less bristling than usual, less cigar smoke and complaint, more steel wire and silence. I came to ask if you've heard, he said as he stepped in without waiting. If you mean about the Holt leaks, we just got a call. He grunted. More's coming. Interpol got tipped. Names across 6 countries. An independent financial ethics group is pushing for formal investigations into dormant trade fraud tied to wartime artifact laundering. Your pal Miss Lang is about to become a footnote in a half-dozen new books. She didn't leak it, I said. I don't care who did. I came to tell you this. Someone's going to come knocking. They'll want that ledger, and they'll want it from you. Wolfe had remained still this whole time. Only now did he speak. They shall not have it. Kramer frowned. You think you can stonewall an international task force? I think, Wolfe said, that I am the only man in this city who has both the original and the restraint not to abuse it. Kramer hesitated. That may not be enough. Then let them come, Wolfe said. They will find a desk, a chair, and a file that will remain unopened unless law compels it by reason, not panic. Kramer studied him. Lang? Safe, Wolfe said. That ledger's a firebomb. Yes, Wolfe replied, but in the right hands fire warms. Kramer shook his head. You're going to get scorched one day, Wolfe. Perhaps, Wolfe said. But not today. When Kramer left, the room felt heavier, not with fear, with inevitability. The past had finally caught up, not just with Lang or Holt or Giselle, but with everyone who thought legacy could be written in silence. I poured myself a brandy. Wolfe didn't want one. "What happens now?" I asked. He opened a new book, a botanical monograph on eastern orchids, and turned the page. "Now?" he said. "Now we wait." "For what?" "For memory," he said, "to become history." Outside it had started to rain, not the dramatic kind, the soft, honest kind that scrubs the dust but leaves the stains. And inside the brownstone the world continued spinning. But this time it was spinning on our terms. If there's one thing I've learned about Nero Wolfe, it's that his definition of finality is rarely permanent. It's a pause, not a period. A full stop that waits to see if anyone dares add a footnote. That's exactly how things felt in the days after the Holt legacy started leaking through the press, like ink on cheap parchment, unfinished, unstable, yet too far along to retract. The Gazette ran a quiet follow-up column 2 days later, quoting anonymous sources about an unnamed archivist who may have preserved transaction records that predated the post-war compliance laws. No mention of Lang, no mention of Wolfe, no mention of the ledger. Just murmurs, deliberate ones. Wolfe had succeeded in making the truth a known threat rather than a printed reality. Still, the doorbell rang more frequently. A British reporter with the accent of someone born in Mayfair and raised by wolves came sniffing around. I told him we were a flower club. He asked what we were cultivating. I told him disappointment. Then came a call from a private museum in Paris, very polite, very vague. Wanted to know if Mr. Wolfe might advise discreetly on issues related to disputed gem acquisitions. Wolfe's answer was 4 words: "I do not travel." Even Saul Panza got propositioned by an Italian antique dealer looking to verify the whereabouts of a unique inventory ledger. Saul, bless him, just said, "What ledger?" and hung up. We'd stirred up a quiet war, a war of implication, not action, but the edges were still sharp. Then, late Thursday, the final guest arrived. I recognized the knock. It wasn't hesitant, but it wasn't loud either. Just final. I opened the door to find Charles Holt Jr. again. He looked older this time. The coat was the same, but the confidence had been peeled back. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I'm not here to reclaim anything," he said, "and I'm not here to threaten you. I've come to return something." Wolfe was waiting in the office, as always. Holt stepped in and slowly reached into his coat pocket. "I found this in my father's personal vault," he said. "It was coded, mislabeled, and tucked behind a file labeled Corinthian Holdings. I had to bribe 3 assistants just to get access, but it belongs to you." He placed the item on Wolfe's desk. It was another copy of the ledger. No embellishments, no annotations, just the same content, handwritten, carefully ordered. Elisa's hand. "You had it all along," Wolfe murmured. "I didn't," Holt said, "but my father did. He was many things, but he wasn't careless." Wolfe stared at the second ledger for a long moment. Then he opened it and scanned several entries. The dates matched, the values matched, the names too, but one line was missing. "Entry 53, Wolfe said. "The stone from Sarajevo." Holt nodded. "Gone, deleted before I found it." "And that's the one you fear?" "No," Holt said. "That's the one that killed a man." We all paused. He continued. "In 1946, my father was..." In Eastern Europe, finalizing a private acquisition. It wasn't sanctioned, it wasn't clean, and another dealer, tried to expose it. He died a week later, officially an accident, but even my father didn't believe that. And Elisa? She knew. That's why that line was always marked in her private copy, even if the detail was sparse. She said it was the stone, with blood in its facets. He wanted it erased, she didn't. Why give this to me now? Wolfe asked. Because, Holt said, you've already won. You have the original, you have the people, and you have the silence. All I have is a name to protect, and a chance to let some ghosts go. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. This is not redemption. No, Holt said, but it's as close as I'll ever get. He stood, nodded once, and left without another word. I watched him from the window, coat flapping in the wind as he walked down the block. He didn't look back. When I returned, Wolfe was still staring at the two ledgers, one whole, one wounded. Which do we keep? And I asked. Both, he said. Truth is not singular. He pulled open the drawer, placed the original back inside, and then carefully set the copy beside it. You think it's over? I asked. For us, yes, he said. For them, never. That night, Fritz served roasted chicken with sage and honey. Wolfe barely touched it. He was quiet even by Wolfe standards. I waited until dessert to speak. She'll stay hidden, I said. Lang. She won't surface again. She was never hiding, Wolfe replied. She was remembering. Same thing sometimes. No, Wolfe said. Hiding is fear. Remembering is duty. The rain started again around midnight, steady, low, and confident, like it had read the ledger and decided to wash the city clean. Before bed, I passed the office one last time. The desk was clear, the lights dim. Wolfe had retired early, but the drawer was locked, and inside it, history rested. 2 ledgers, 1 woman's legacy, and the weight of a truth too dangerous for daylight. Wolfe had said it best. Memory becomes history, but only if someone is willing to hold it long enough. And that, I realized, was what we'd really done. We'd held the past and made sure it didn't disappear quietly.